Ancient Africa, A Global History to 300 C. Comprehensive Historical Overview. Ancient Africa, Global History to 300 C would present sweeping narrative of the African continent's formative eras, challenging Eurocentric perspectives by foregrounding Africa's indigenous innovations, complex societies, and profound interconnectedness with the wider ancient world. Far from being an isolated landmass, the book would argue that Africa was a dynamic crucible of human evolution, technological advancement, and culture exchange, deeply influencing and being influenced by regions across Eurasia. The global history approach emphasizes internal African linkages, from the Sahara's ancient green corridors to the Great Lakes and the Atlantic coast, as well as vital external connections, particularly through trade, migration, and intellectual exchange, all culminating in the dawn of new millennium. 1. Foundations. The deep past in the cradle of humanity, c. 2.6 million BE, 8000 BE. The book would commence by rooting ancient African history in the very origins of humanity. It would explore the latest archaeological and paleontological evidence, placing the genesis of Homo sapiens in East and Southern Africa, tracing the earliest cognitive leaps, tool-making traditions, Oldo and Acheulean, and the subsequent out-of-Africa migrations that populated the globe. This foundational segment would detail the diverse environments, savannas, rainforests, deserts, and coasts that shaped early human adaptation and technological diversification across the continent. It would highlight the ingenuity of early hunter-gatherer societies, their sophisticated knowledge of flora and fauna, and the development of complex social structures and symbolic thought, evidenced by rock art and burial practices found across the continent from the Sahara to the Cape. 2. The dawn of agriculture and sedentary life, c. 8000 BE, 3500 BE. This section would pivot to the critical shift from foraging to food production, demonstrating that Africa was an independent center of agricultural innovation distinct from the Fertile Crescent. It would detail the domestication of indigenous crops like millet, sorghum, African rice, and yams in various regions, often concurrently, the critical role of the Sahara. Then verdant grassland. Its hub for cattle pastoralism and early village life would be emphasized, with archaeological sites revealing sophisticated pottery, early forms of social organization, and evidence of thriving environment that sustained large populations before desertification. The chapter would explore how this agricultural revolution laid the groundwork for increased population densities, more complex social hierarchies, and the emergence of specialized, setting the stage for urbanism. 3. The majesty of the Nile. Egypt and Nubia, c. 3500 BE, 300 C. The Nile Valley would naturally form central pillar of the narrative, showcasing not one but two interconnected civilizations. Ancient Egypt and the various polities of Nubia Kashe. Ancient Egypt, the gift of the Nile and its African context. The book would trace the unification of Egypt and the rise of the pharaonic state, detailing the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. Critically, it would analyze Egypt not as an isolated entity but as an African power deeply intertwined with its southern neighbor Nubia and other Saharan and North African groups. Discussions would cover monumental architecture, complex religious systems, advanced in writing, hieroglyphs, mathematics, and medicine. Emphasis would be placed on Egypt's resource extraction from Nubia, gold, ebony, ivory, and its military and cultural interactions with Libya to the west and the Levant to the east, illustrating its role as regional hegemon and node in wider Afro-Asiatic networks. The late period and the subsequent Greek, Ptolemaic, and Roman occupations would be examined through the lens of continuity and change in Egyptian society and its continued engagement with the African interior. B. Nubia, the rival kingdoms and cultural innovators. Parallel to Egypt, the narrative would thoroughly explore the rich history of Nubian civilizations. It would begin with a group and C-group cultures showcasing their distinct identities and interactions with early Egypt. The rise of the Kingdom of Kerma, c. 2500-1500 BE, would be highlighted as powerful, independent state that challenged Egyptian expansion, developed its own unique architectural styles, religious practices, and extensive trade networks. Following period of Egyptian domination, the book would detail the emergence of the Napatan kingdom, c. 750 BE, which remarkably conquered and ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty, the Black Pharaohs, marking period of significant cultural revitalization and powerful assertion of African agency. The focus would then shift to c. 300 BE, 300 C, the heartland of the later Kushite kingdom, Meroë would be presented as major economic and cultural powerhouse, notable for its prolific iron production, one of the earliest large-scale iron industries in Africa. Its unique Meroitic script, distinctive pyramid construction, and vibrant syncretic culture blending Egyptian and indigenous African elements. Its strategic location facilitated trade, both the Red Sea coast and thus India and the sub-Saharan interior, making it a crucial link in transcontinental exchange network. The book would analyze Meroë's resilience and independence, including its successful resistance against Roman incursions. Or North Africa, from indigenous roots to Punic and Roman influence, c. 1000e, 300c. Beyond the Nile, the diverse region of North Africa encompassing the Maghreb and the Sahara would receive dedicated attention. The indigenous Berber legacy. The deep history of the amazing Berber peoples, their nomadic and semi-nomadic lifestyles, and early agricultural practices would be detailed. The formation of early tribal confederations and their sophisticated understanding of the Saharan environment would be presented, highlighting their role as vital intermediaries in burgeoning trans-Saharan trade. Carthage, Punic metropolis on African soil. The arrival. Phoenician traders and the subsequent founding of Carthage, c. 814 BCE, would be critically examined. While often viewed through Mediterranean lens, the book would analyze Carthage's unique position as an Afro-Mediterranean power, its vast mercantile empire, complex political structure, and formidable navy. It would be discussed in the context of its economic exploitation of North African resources and its military interactions with the indigenous Berber kingdoms, Numidia, Mauritania, and Sicily. The Punic Wars, while focusing on the conflict with Rome, would also highlight the agency of African forces, including Hannibal's elephants and the skilled Numidian cavalry. See Roman North Africa, integration and resistance. The conquest of Carthage and the establishment of Roman provinces would be explored, focusing on the extensive Romanization of coastal areas, agricultural development, especially grain production for Rome, and the construction of cities like Leptis, Magna, and Timgad. However, the book would also meticulously document the persistent resistance of indigenous Berber groups and the symbiotic, often tense, relationship between Roman authorities and local populations, demonstrating that Roman control, rarely absolute, particularly in the hinterlands. This section would also discuss the economic integration of North Africa into the Roman imperial system and its eventual role in the spread of early Christianity across the continent. 5. West Africa, the emergence of early societies and iron technology, c. 1000b, 300c. This critical region would be presented as another independent center of innovation, particularly in agriculture and metallurgy, agricultural innovations in early villages. The book would trace the development of agricultural systems tailored to the savanna and forest zones, including the cultivation of African rice, yams, and oil palms. It would highlight the emergence of settled communities along major rivers like the Niger, leading to increased social complexity and the beginnings of hierarchical structures. The Nok culture and the mastery of iron. Significant focus would be the culture of central Nigeria at c. 1500 BCE. 500 c. Renowned for its distinctive terracotta sculptures, and crucially for being one of the earliest known centers of iron smelting and working in sub-Saharan Africa, dating back to at least 1000 BE. The book would debate whether iron technology diffused from North Africa or arose independently, emphasizing the profound impact of this innovation. Agriculture, clearing land, new tools, warfare, and social organization. The Nok culture would serve as a powerful example of an advanced, non-urbanized society with sophisticated artistic and technological capabilities. See early trans-Saharan connections. While large-scale trans-Saharan trade would flourish later, the book would identify the nascent routes and early forms of exchange, e.g., salt, metals, prestige goods that began to connect West African communities with the Mediterranean coast, laying the groundwork for future empires. The role of pastoralists and the gradual adaptation to desert travel pre-camel use would also be discussed. 6. East Africa, coastal networks and the rise of Axum, c. 1000 BE. 300 c. East Africa, with its long coastline and diverse interior, would be presented as a dynamic zone of indigenous development and international interaction. Early agriculturalists and pastoralists. The presence of early Cushitic and Nilotic language speakers, their pastoralist lifestyles, and the development of agriculture in the Great Lakes region and the Ethiopian highlands would be detailed, illustrating the diverse ways in which communities adapted to varied ecological niches. The Red Sea and Indian Ocean trade networks. This section would emphasize the ancient maritime connections linking East Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, India, and even further east. The book would describe the trade in commodities like frankincense, myrrh, gold, ivory, and animal products. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea in ancient Greek text would be used as key source to illustrate the vibrant commercial hubs emerging along the coast, such as Rapta and their interactions with interior African suppliers. This early trade laid the foundation for the later Swahili city-states. C. Genesis of Aksum. The most significant development in this period would be the emergence of the Aksumite kingdom in the Ethiopian Highlands c. 100 c. 300 c. The book would trace its origins, highlighting the blend of indigenous African cultures with South Arabian influences. Sabaean. Aksum would be portrayed as burgeoning regional power, controlling vital trade routes, developing its own unique jazz script, and erecting impressive stelae. Its strategic location at the crossroads of Africa and Asia would make it a crucial player in the global trade networks of the ancient world. 7. Central and Southern Africa. The Bantu expansions in early Iron Age c. 1000 BE. 300 c. This vast region would be characterized by profound demographic and technological shifts primarily driven by the Bantu migrations. A. The Bantu expansions, transformative force. The book would dedicate significant attention to the Bantu migrations, one of the largest demographic movements in human history. Originating from West Central Africa, these agriculturalist and iron-using groups spread across vast swaths of Central, Eastern, and Southern Africa over millennia. The narrative would explore the likely reasons for this expansion, e.g., population pressure superior. Agricultural techniques, iron tools, its multidirectional nature, and its profound impact on the linguistic, cultural, and technological landscape of the continent, the interaction between incoming Bantu speakers and indigenous hunter-gatherer populations, e.g., Santois, would be explored, ranging from assimilation to displacement. Early Iron Age societies. The spread of iron metallurgy alongside the Bantu migrations would be central theme. The book would detail how iron tools facilitated forest clearing, improved agricultural productivity, and led to the development of more complex social structures capable of organizing resource extraction and craft specialization. Archaeological evidence of early Iron Age settlements, pottery styles, and burial practices across Central and Southern Africa would illustrate the diverse ways these new technologies were integrated into existing societies and led to the formation of proto-states and chiefdoms. 8. Cross-cutting themes and global interconnectedness. Throughout the book, several overarching themes would be woven into the regional narratives to reinforce the global history premise. Trade networks. The book would emphasize the intricate web of trade routes, both internal, e.g., within the Nile Valley along the Niger River across the Sahara and external Red Sea, Indian Ocean, Mediterranean. It would illustrate how commodities like gold, salt, spices, textiles, and manufactured goods flowed across the continent and beyond, fostering cultural exchange and economic interdependence, technological diffusion and innovation. The independent development and diffusion of crucial technologies, particularly agriculture and iron metallurgy, would be recurring focus. The book would challenge linear narratives of technological transfer, showcasing Africa's role as both recipient and an originator of groundbreaking innovations. Environmental adaptation. The ingenuity of ancient African societies in adapting to diverse and often challenging environments, from deserts to rainforests, savannas to highlands, would be highlighted, showcasing sustainable practices in the development of specialized knowledge systems. Cultural exchange and syncretism. The intermingling of ideas, artistic styles, religious beliefs, and social structures would be key theme. Examples would range from blending of Egyptian and Nubian deities to the adoption of Mediterranean cultural elements in North Africa, all while retaining distinct African identities. Africa's place in the ancient world. The book would consistently position Africa as an active participant in global events, not passive backdrop. It would demonstrate how events in the Mediterranean, Near East, and even Asia had repercussions in Africa and vice versa, underscoring the continent's vital role in the ancient global system. In conclusion, a continent in motion towards a new era, 300 C. The concluding section would synthesize the diverse historical threads, emphasizing the remarkable achievements and transformations that occurred across Africa by 300 C. It would highlight the emergence of sophisticated state-level societies, Egypt, Meroë, Aksum, Carthage, the widespread adoption of iron technology, the establishment of extensive trade networks, and rich tapestry of linguistic and cultural diversity. The book would leave the reader with profound understanding of Africa's ancient complexity and its foundational contributions to human history, setting the stage for the rise of new empires, the spread of major religions, and continued global engagement in the centuries to follow. It would reinforce the idea that the ancient history of Africa is not merely regional study, but an indispensable component of truly global historical narrative.